How's it going, friends? Welcome to my video. Today we are going to be talking about the opening phase of the chess game. The opening phase is about the first 10, 12, maybe 15 moves of the game where you're sort of like developing your pieces and just like trying to determine sort of what to do. And it's very highly talked about because you can sort of like do all your opening memorizations, opening theory, everything like that. Since it's kind of the one part of the game that you can script, so to speak, you can just kind of like determine like which opening you're gonna play. If my opponent does this, I'll do this, etc. It's unlike the middle game and end game, to where in the middle game, end game, you don't know what's coming. I guess you can know in-game theory, but you can't have really predicted that earlier. Whereas the opening, you can do theory. But this video isn't going to be about opening theory necessarily. We're not going to be talking about like these 20 move lines or anything like that. I want to sort of give you a few guiding principles as to how to play the opening well. How to play the opening well so that when you play your chess games and you get a good position of the opening, you have a strong sort of foothold as you go into the middle game and then ultimately the end game, right? So we're gonna be looking at those core principles, and so stay tuned. You will love this video. You're gonna learn a lot. But before you do so, if you like videos like this, feel free to smash that subscribe button. I would greatly appreciate it. I recently got 300 subscribers on my YouTube channel, so what you're watching here. So I greatly appreciate it. But if you don't mind, smash that subscribe button, leave a comment, turn notifications on, whatever they say. I hope I checked all the boxes. And with that said, let's talk about the opening. So like I mentioned earlier, there are a few guiding principles that are going to help you play the opening well. We're going to look at some sort of like common opening examples and explain why they are good, and then look at sort of like one master game that sort of demonstrates the opening principles and how they can be used effectively. So the thing is, there are 3 core principles that we're going to talk about. And then there are about, I didn't actually count, 4 or 5 kind of side principles that I added. And you can really like make up more side principles if you really want to. The key is there are about like 15 opening principles you have to know at some point. But this isn't really about like memorizing them or anything like that. Trust me, when I'm playing a chess game, I'm not thinking about, okay, did I check this box? Did I check this, that, and things like that. Eventually, it all becomes intuitive, and you just play openings that are very natural and naturally sort of naturally sort of play to the strengths. And so we're going to look at the principles. I'd say the 3 core principles are really important to know, but then like the side ones, you can kind of like, they are important to know as well, but it's not imperative for you to have them like super memorized during your chess game. So the core principles goes as follow. Number 1, you want to control the center. The center is revolved around these 4 squares. So you want to sort of like revolve your game around the squares, and we'll talk about ways you can do that here in a second. But why is controlling the center important? Controlling the center in chess is important because that area of the board sort of gives you greater influence over all the other sort of like phases of the board, or spaces of the board, because if you can effectively control the center, you have flexibility to attack on the king side, you go on the queen side, you can stay in the center, everything like that. Whereas if you were to focus all your efforts on like one side of the board or the other, then you wouldn't really have as much flexibility. Also, if you have dominant control of the center, it kind of restricts what your opponent can do, because then they'd be kind of like resort to playing on like the flanks and everything like that, right? Now, what I would say specifically as far as controlling the center is you want to put 1 pawn in the center at least, 2 if you can, and we'll go into that here in a second. And you also want to develop your pieces towards the center. So basically, a lot of people start with a move like e4 or d4. Those are both good moves that put your pawn in the center. Now, when I say 1 or 2, here's a sort of rule of thumb I have. If your opponent plays like e5 or c5 or something like that, like if they play Sicilian, I would encourage you to start developing your pieces, which will be our second core principle. So go like knight f3, bishop c4. Well, actually not bishop c4 against Sicilian. That's a more advanced thing. But like, knight f3, bishop b5, knight c3, everything like that. So against like e4, c5, or e5, I'd encourage you to do that. If your opponent plays a move that does not directly challenge the following move, which is d4, you should just play d4. So what I mean is if your opponent plays like a Caro-Kann or a French, or they play like a5 for some reason, right? I would encourage you just put a second pawn in the center, because it's going to maximize the amount of center control that you're going to have and lead you to a advantage. So common opening, for example, is the Caro-Kann with c6. The idea is for black to springboard d5, but then after d4, you get 2 pawns in the center. Your opponent plays d5, and you can sort of decide if you want to just develop a piece and protect the pawn. Do you want to advance, everything like that? So principle number 1 is you want to control the center, and kind of the specific sub-principles is you want to put a pawn or 2 in the center, depending on if they allow you to put 2, and you want to develop your pieces towards the center. Speaking of which, we'll talk about the second principle, which is you do want to develop your pieces. Now, develop your pieces. What does that mean? If you're new to chess, if you're like, especially if you're a kid and you're like new to all the terminology, you might be thinking, develop my pieces, what? Quite simply, that just means getting your pieces out. So you put your pawn or your 2 pawns in the center. You want to focus on sort of like getting your pieces out. And as I stated earlier, you want to develop them towards the center. So, for example, after move like e4, e5, where do we develop this knight? We're not going to go to h3. That's away from the center. And also that is, you know, sort of, the knight's on the edge anyway, where it controls less squares. You're not going to go to e2. While it is more towards the center, it's not as close to the center as you can be. You're also blocking the bishop and everything like that. You'll go knight f3, because you develop the knight towards the center. You're attacking the e5 pawn, which oftentimes induces black to play a move like knight c6, developing the other knight while protecting the pawn. So you want to develop your pieces. You want to develop your pieces towards the center. But what I would also say, though, is this sort of like plays to another principle, side principle that is, which is that while you do want to develop your pieces, there is a caveat there, which is that you want to primarily focus on your center pawns, your knights, and your bishops. You don't want to develop, obviously you're not going to develop your king, because your king has to be safe, which is going to be one of the principles, but you generally don't want to bring the queen or the rooks out too early. The reason for that is those pieces can easily get attacked because they are so valuable. If just about any piece attacks the queen or the rook, then you have to move. And in chess, you don't want to be like, you know, just like keep moving pieces that are attacked and everything like that. You want every move, if possible, to be productive. So you just want to develop your pawn, develop your knight, develop your bishop, everything like that. So where it could get messy is something like this, where white tries like a 4-move checkmate with queen h5, attacking the pawn and hoping to get bishop c4 and queen f7 checkmate. Here what black can do is first they'll develop the knight to protect the pawn on e5. And if we go bishop c4, then black is able to play this move pawn g6, attacking the queen, and then queen drops back to f3, attacking checkmate once again, and black can go knight c6, sorry, knight f6, and sure enough, like later in the game, black could go like bishop g4, attacking the queen. If the queen goes to e3, there's opportunities to go like knight b4, threatening a fork, and also which would also attack the queen. Like, you see the queen is like very exposed. You don't really want to do that. Another thing I see a lot is, especially among beginners, they'll try to, on the first move, kind of get their rook out by playing h4, rook h3, which I would say, like, I mean, that's, like, pretty good thinking if you're completely new to chess. The problem is, after a move like e5, rook h3, again, the rook is a very valuable piece. Black can actually play a move like d5, which, well, one, controls the center with 2 pawns, as we talked about, right? We're controlling the center with 2 pawns, but also the bishop is open up to the rook on the h3 square. And as we all know, the rook is worth 5, the bishop is 3, so we want to move our rook. We could go rook e3, but then after move just like bishop d6, there's all kinds of opportunities later in the game for this rook to be attacked. And it's not going to be a very comfortable situation, right? So we want to avoid using our queen and rooks too early. Another thing we want to sort of avoid doing is we want to avoid blocking in our own pieces. So some examples might be after e4, e5, you know, already we can see several opportunities to kind of block our own pieces because we want our development to be harmonious. We ideally want to get the knight out, the bishop out, castle, get our knight to our best square, get the bishop out, right? We want to be harmonious. Well, there are moves that you can play that sort of prevent the harmony. One could be a move like, for example, queen f3, which not only violates the principle of getting your queen out too early, but also the knight is blocked from its best square. If we go pawn to d3, that blocks our bishop, which previously had aspirations, go c4 or b5, depending on position, everything like that. Whereas when we go d3, now the bishop is stuck to the e2 square. Or unless you want to go g3, bishop g2, in which you would be blocked by the e-pawn. So we don't want to play moves like d3 before we have developed our bishop. You know, same for a move like, let's say in a London system, or like, you know, just something like this. If we play e3 first, now, ironically, that's a Kali system, which is an acceptable opening, but it does block in the bishop, so there is that sort of downside. So you generally want to avoid blocking your own pieces. What you also want to avoid is blocking your center pawns, and there are a couple reasons for that. And let's just say a simple opening like e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and just like bishop d3. Bishop d3 blocks the d-pawn. Well, why is that important? Well, one, you might just want to use your d-pawn later. Like, you might want to go d4 later in the game, and developing the bishop there sort of takes away that flexibility. If you did want to move the d-pawn, then you'd have to move your bishop again, which would waste the tempo. But also, when you put the bishop on d3, you're blocking the d-pawn, which is blocking this bishop. Therefore, it is sort of impeding on your harmonious development. So you're not able to develop the bishop in the same way you could. And like, yes, you could go b3, bishop b2, but you're kind of like biting on granite with the d5, the e5 square. The bishop going to that square, b2. So it's just not a good move. A move like bishop d3 is not really a move you want to play. Another example, now this is a little bit more polarizing because this opening is, well, actually, this isn't really related to blocking your center pawn, but even a move like c3. Now, c3 looks good because you're preparing d4, which does strengthen your center control, but you want to be careful about it because it does block your knight from its best square. That said, if you do kind of get this and just want to play d4, I mean, that's totally fine. I do just want to, like, make you aware of that. So the core principles: control the center, develop your pieces. Last but not least is just protecting your king, which 99% of the time is just castling. Now, why do we want to protect our king? Why do we want to castle our king? Well, the reason we want to protect our king is because if we lose our king, we lose the game. So our king is very sort of valuable prized possession. Also, the king is not very mobile at all, so it is, you know, relatively easy to checkmate the king compared to like trapping other pieces. The reason you want to castle, though, is because if you think about it, all the action development is going on in the center, and your king, relative to the other pieces, starts at the center. So ideally, you want to move away from the center if you're the king, either castling short or castling long. Castling short is most of the time more practical because it takes less moves. All you have to do is move the pawn, knight, bishop, and then castle. Whereas if you want castle queenside, you have to go pawn, knight, bishop, there's an extra queen move, and then you castle queenside. And also sometimes if like the D and C pawns move, like the king could be pretty weak on that side of the board, right? So you generally, you can castle either way. You just want to castle at some point. Another sort of like sub principle is that you don't want to move the pawns in front of your king. So if you castle this way, you don't want to start just playing like h3, g4, everything like that, because it gives your opponent sort of opportunities to attack the king, because your pawns are kind of the bodyguards of your king, and the only way for your opponent to really attack your king is going to be at some point to get in contact with the pawns. So by playing moves like h3, g4, you just invite your opponent. You're like, opponent, come here. I'm going to, you know, let you attack me, right? So let's just say like d6, h3, castle, we just play like this for no reason. Then suddenly our opponent can play, even like knight takes g4 here is apparently viable, but move like h5, for instance, and if we take, you know, there's bishop h3, and the king is suddenly feeling a lot of air, right? So we want to protect our king and also to sort of like keep our bodyguards there. Normally, one kingside pawn move is fine. Oftentimes, h3 is a good move to kind of like prevent a move like bishop g4. Or later in the game, it also prevents a back rank checkmate because your king has an escape square. But generally, you just want to keep it at one. You don't really want to do more than that because there are only so many kingside pawn moves that you can play. At a certain point, your king is just going to be too exposed, right? I'll point out another sort of sub-principle. I didn't necessarily plan on sort of talking about this, is that this is in regards to actually control of the center. let's just say like in the Scotch game, you generally want to capture towards the center rather than away, if you have like multiple options. So here, white plays knight takes c6, and black has the option to capture either b takes or d takes. And the correct answer is to play b takes, actually, because we are capturing towards the center, and a potential pawn break like d5, once again controlling the center and attacking, is going to hold more weight than, you know, if you just capture with the d pawn. Like, what are we doing here, right? Another very practical example actually could come from like a London system. So let's just say bishop f4, here. Excuse me, I'm just like sort of like making moves. Bishop d6, bishop g3, and bishop takes. Well, here you want to play h takes, you capture towards the center, and you also open up the rook. If you play f takes, then your pawns are kind of split, and you don't really strengthen your control of the center, right? So, anywho, those are the opening principles. You want to control the center, you want to develop your pieces, and you want to protect your king. So, let's look at an example game. Paul Morphy versus Duke Carl and Count of Isoard. This is a very famous game. There's a good chance that you have seen this, and every chess YouTuber on the planet has like shown this at some point, so it'll be my turn to show it. But what I want to do is kind of highlight sort of how Paul Morphy sort of played the opening, how his opponent or opponents, because this was like a team effort by the Duke and the Count. Maybe they alternate moves, they discussed, I don't know. This was played at an opera, hence why this game's called the opera game. And so I want to highlight how Paul Morphy sort of demonstrated the opening principles, while his opponents maybe lacked some and got punished as a result. So e4 is a good move, controlling the center. Morphy develops his knight, puts his pawn out to d4. So, you know, if he had done it a move earlier, that is d4, then black could take, and then Morphy would be sort of like compelled to expose the queen with queen takes d4, which could allow like knight c6 and things to get weird. So he plays knight f3 first. The Duke and the Count play d6, which is a move, but it's not a move I would recommend because it blocks in the bishop, and Morphy kind of takes advantage of that by going d4. The Duke and Count play bishop g4, and we got this line where Morphy is able to sort of, you know, threaten checkmate. Now, you might be thinking, well, Daniel, you just said don't bring your queen out too early. Well, one, the Duke and the Count gave up their bishop for a knight, and it's simply just better to recapture with the queen than with the pawn. Recapturing with pawns kind of silly. You double your pawns, like open where your king would want to castle maybe. But also, quite simply in chess, there are rules for the, there's room for the rules to kind of be like bended or broken and everything like that. The queen is not very well exposed. Is not very exposed on f3. Part of it being that one of the main potential attacking pieces, being the bishop, was traded, right? So we're not too concerned about it. So bishop c4 develops with tempo. Black played knight f6, white played queen b3, attacking the pawn and the pawn. So black sort of defended the f7 pawn. Morphy played knight c3. He didn't go pawn hunting, which I think is actually very noble, because he realized that there's a lot of potential. The king is not castling anytime soon. The development's kind of wonky, so he just saw some potential to go knight c3 and bishop g5. Then after b5, Paul Morphy did not move the bishop back, like many of you probably would. He sacrificed the knight. Knight takes b5, double exclam. The idea being that if pawn takes, bishop takes, king d8 is just like, you know, like, you're losing the game for yourself, pretty much. Like, white's gonna castle and attack the king and everything like that. And after knight d7, there's kind of this double pin going on. Morphy is able to castle queenside, and then after rook d8, Morphy sacrifices the rook with rook takes d7, and then rook d1, so we're exploiting this pin, and then we get this very famous checkmate after queen e6. White took the rook and then went queen b8 check, inducing rook to d8 checkmate, which is commonly known as the opera game. But note how the game sort of progressed. Morphy just controlled the center, developed his pieces. His opponents, after moves like queen e7, like the king was kind of stuck in the center. The development was lacking, like the bishop wasn't out, and eventually Morphy was able to take advantage of that. Now, you're not always going to have these games where you can just sort of like sacrifice your pieces and sack the queen and everything like that, but if you follow the opening principles better than your opponent, for the most part, you're going to win. So, I hope this was very helpful for you. Let me know in the comments what you think. I'm trying to get more sort of like long form videos out. I've been doing a lot of short form content, but trying to work on the long form. So any feedback would be greatly appreciated. And yeah, thank you all so much for watching. I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and be on the lookout for my next videos. Peace.